Those are those folks who, some of you may be on emergency permits here that are maybe teaching out of an area that you are licensed in, or maybe you're not licensed quite yet. 3,400 is a very, very high number. When you start talking across the nation, that's high. The reason for that is superintendents, principals, all of you on hiring committees, you're trying to get the best people in those positions that you can find. And if it takes emergency permits, it takes emergency permits. You are lucky to have chemistry and physics still hanging on in your district, and the facts. Many, as I go across the state, you can't find anyone to teach those areas. They're like endangered species. They're just not there. This is what's keeping a lot of those programs alive. Art, right behind it, special education, anything secondary, our math, science, technology areas, and now elementary is becoming an issue. Our teaching, though, just so you know, in the first 3 years, or the first 5 years, we're losing about 30% of our teachers. And that's just not from District A to District B, that's they're getting out. So I think all of us play a part in that, and I know that goes back to the jobs are difficult, but also there's a lot of complexities and a lot of things that go into that. But this is who we are. Our free and reduced numbers always gets attention when I go across the state. Here in Covington, your free and reduced looks a lot different than it does at IPS. It looks a lot different than it does in Carmel. And when you have that, you need to treat schools individually. That free and reduced number, though, is continuing to creep up for the entire state. The biggest question I get from our lawmakers is, how can that be? How can, with unemployment being so low, can we still have that free and reduced percentage continuing to creep up? You all know the answer to that. You have those families that are working $10 an hour jobs, they're working multiple jobs, the kids are living with grandparents. We have a high number of students in foster care across our state, and our number of homeless students is soaring. So that free and reduced number makes sense to all of us and to the rest of the educators in the state, but sometimes that gets lost. The other thing that's happening is our number of students who are speaking more than one language. We are creeping up to about 290-ish right now. That's very fluid, but that's an enormous amount of different languages that are the primary language beyond English. I walk into some districts and I say, how many languages do you have here? And they'll say 120. Now, if that doesn't impact how you service students, we need to rethink that. I walk into other districts and they'll tell me 5. Some districts tell me 2. There's just a huge, vast variety and difference, regardless or depending on where you go in the state of Indiana. This slide, I think, shows us a lot. That graduation rate in the very bottom in the corner, this is the first time in a long time our public schools have gone over 90%. That is something that should be celebrated. We hovered in those high 80s for a while. We are now over 90. If you look at the screen, obviously there are some areas we need to work on. So our charter school graduation rate's not where we want it to be. We have mechanisms in place to get that higher, but those numbers also include our adult charter schools, which are our students who I say that's their last ditch effort for diploma. So that does make a difference when you're talking grad rates, but you should all be celebrated. That 90% is not easy. I know, having been a superintendent, having watched how high schools operate, and you backward build that, you will do whatever you have to do to get a kid across the stage and meet them, as long as they're meeting you halfway or meeting you a little bit of the way. You're going to do whatever you can do to get them across that stage. So this is who we are. I know as a district, you tell your story. I would encourage you to continue to do that. This slide always gets people's attention because we have 1.1 million students. We are serving a lot of students through a lot of schools. And what's happening in Indiana, because we're heavy choice is not going away. So regardless of whether you love it, hate it, or don't really care, choice isn't going away. And that means a kid can choose to go public to public transfer, private to public, charter to private, and they're all over the place. And they're very, very mobile. Some students that we're tracking will go to 30 different schools in a year. So kids, we have one that's getting ready to split again, so that's going to be interesting what that does. At a time where talk is consolidation, we have districts that are even tiny districts splitting into 2 still to this day. That's happening. But our total number of schools is down a bit, but look at that charter number. So if you see the charter number going up 58%, what that tells you is there's only one pot of money. And when that pot of money gets stretched thinner, that impacts Covington. It impacts every single district in the state of Indiana. What do you do about that? You have a voice. Whether you agree or disagree, you have a voice, and you have people who vote for you at the State House. That's the only mechanism that allows for that conversation to happen. You can go to Dr. Smith. He has nothing to do with whether a charter's here or not. He has nothing to do with whether our vouchers are here or not. You have to go to those people who are making those decisions at the State House. But this is something we keep an eye on. That charter number continues to increase. Just this year alone, we had 7 charters shut down and 8 charters start up in the state of Indiana. Now, every time that happens, they have common school loans to the tunes of millions of dollars. And when they shut their doors, do you think they go, hey, Indiana, here's your money back? No. So every time that happens, we keep a running total of the millions of dollars that are going to nonprofit and for-profit charters. That's not all of them. There are some charters that are doing a really good job that are fiscally responsible. But we have a huge chunk of them that we should be asking some questions. And that's exactly what we're doing at the department right now, trying to gather data and tell that story. Not necessarily worried about all the ethnicity groups, because you have to have at least 10 students to be concerned about these groups, in any one of them. You have special education you're concerned about, you have your free and reduced students you're worried about, but as far as accountability, your world looks very different from what you're watching than like a Goshen would look, and we're very well aware of that. We are keeping an eye on this because obviously there are gaps in performance, and it is easy to talk about those gaps, it is difficult to address it. Who are my special ed teachers in here? Bless your heart. So I was a special ed teacher back in the day, and when you say move the special ed cohort group, I know how hard that is to do. And so this is the area that we are well aware that EL, special ed, our different ethnicities, free and reduced, it takes a lot of resources, it takes time, it takes specialties, it takes a lot. But we are keeping an eye on this just because those gaps continue to increase. We show you this for a couple of reasons. One, in the middle column, I want you to know what's happening with dual credits. This is not a surprise to our high school folks, but across the state, 64% of our kids are graduating with some college credit. It may be one college credit, it may be an associate degree, it may be a bachelor's degree. We have kids graduating with high school with their high school diploma and a bachelor's degree at the same time. We have kids graduating from high school with associates. We have some kids going to Purdue, IU, Indiana State, you name it, and they're like, I took 15 hours with me. That is an enormous financial savings for your families. It's enormous savings for our communities and for our state. So the work you're doing in dual credit, thank you for that. Some of that's through actual dual credit courses, some of it's through advanced placement, international baccalaureate, a lot of different ways to do it. But for those of you who are getting that done, for our students who have at least some college under their belt, their success rate in college, they're tracking all that, you cannot argue that, plus the cost savings. So that piece of it's very impressive. The other piece of it, at a time where we hear we can't get the kids ready, I hear that a lot. I'll run into our lawmakers and they're like, you know what, you're just not getting it done. And I'm like, really? Because 64% of them are going on to post-secondary education. That is something to be celebrated, at 64%. Do we want that to be 100%? Sure. But there are just some students that either aren't interested or don't have the capacity to do that. They may go directly into the workforce. Now, if you think you're going to go directly into the workforce and not require some higher education in a job that's going to be a wage that's going to be meaningful and livable, you're probably going to have to do that. But some kids are going directly into the workforce and they're having success. So, but this 64% is something to be celebrated. The other piece of the diploma, which I know high school people are watching nervously, something is coming. We're not sure what. Something is coming as far as messing with those diplomas again. I'm not sure what that's going to look like because we just got into grad pathways and I'm hearing changes are coming. So as soon as you figure it out, the moving target starts to happen. So we're not exactly sure, but keep an eye on the type of diplomas we're giving. Also, if you're doing an Exit 20 code, which are those kids who come to you and say, I'm going to go homeschool. And there really is not, there are traditional homeschool families that do a really good job, and there are those ones because they're mad at the principal that they're out of here and you will see them in a year. They just took a little sabbatical. That is not good. But those are the kids that we're watching, about 20% of our students who exit to homeschool, they come off of your books. Sometimes they never come back, and now the state's going not so fast. So pay attention to that. That's not a huge issue where we're sitting in Covington, but across the state is becoming interesting. I will say we backward build that now into middle school. We're having a mass exodus in Indiana from our middle school students going to our virtual schools. That is a huge movement right now. Our largest high school in the state by far is our virtual high school. Our largest middle school in the state by far is our virtual middle school. And I promise you, elementary's coming. So if you get sideways with a second grade teacher, they're gonna say, and parents know it, I'm gonna go do virtual education. If they get sideways with the algebra teacher, that's fine. I'm leaving, I'm gonna go on virtual. So that's happening, and as fast as they leave, they're coming right back. There's something to pay attention to. Statewide proficiency with iLearn, I know. So the piece with iLearn, here's the conversation that's happening that you need to pay attention to. When we did the proficiency, when we did a comparison of current versus historical, every time we change the exam, there is a dip. That's what happens. I don't care if you give an exam to kids or adults, that's what happens. Historically, the dip happened on the right-hand side. You can see those percentage declines, and then you can see the ones we just suffered through iLearn on the left-hand side. So in English language arts, we went down 16% in the yellow highlight. In math, we went down 11%. The math looked much better than it did the last time we had the dip. The problem is, we are still recovering from the last historical dip, whether it's iStep 10 or whether it was iStep. We are still recovering from that. And then you throw on iLearn, and we look not great. So when you're hovering in the 30s, you're hovering in the 40s, what do you think the lawmakers come to us and say? We need a new exam. Okay, well, we just spent $10 million to develop the exam you told us to develop within the guardrails you gave us as legislators. Now it's, we need a new exam. So I don't know what's going to happen, but there's a lot of chatter about a new exam. So we've been iLearn for about a second. We may be moving to something new here shortly. So that's something else to be paying attention to. On our state accountability system, you know what? Skip to here for just a minute. For our state accountability, given the historical and what I just showed you, if we don't have help, if we don't have help from our lawmakers, which we are begging them to help us, but if we don't have help, on the left-hand side is the state system that did not adjust. So before we put in iLearn, we went to our lawmakers and said, you have to change the scale. It does not fit a new exam. It is not set to absorb it because it came into play in 2014. It didn't work then, and it's not going to work again. So you have to change it. Well, there wasn't a big appetite to change it. They said it is what it is. If we don't get help, the red shows you we will have no A's in any building across the state of Indiana, none. We will have 2% B's, 3% A, or 8% C's, 16 D's, and we will have 74% of our schools F's. So you can see the number, the raw number is 1,284 F's if we don't have help. Now our argument is, do you really think we have 1,284 F's as schools in the state of Indiana? Now depending on who you ask, careful on that question answer, but most reasonable people know that's ridiculous. So this is the piece that we are asking and begging for help. Now if you switch to the right-hand side, that's the federal accountability system that we developed with over 1,000 educators, knowing what was coming with a new assessment and knowing we had to absorb some of that hit. If you look at the federal system, again, not perfect, but much better than the other system, it is set up to absorb some of that. Now, self-disclosure, the only thing you have right now is proficiency data. You do not have your growth data yet. So this is based on proficiency. Do I think growth will help? I think growth is going to help the federal system. Growth, I don't think is going to help your state system because it's not set up to help. So these are some very preliminary, haven't really been shared a whole lot, numbers that we are watching. So what did we do? Well, we went to our General Assembly and said we have to have these 3 things happen. And we're asking for them to happen on Organization Day, which is in November at the State House. We need you to hit the pause button and keep the hold harmless so you are not penalizing schools for their performance on the last item. We are also asking them to hit the pause button on intervention. So for here, that doesn't play into things, but if you are a school that's had numerous Fs and you're getting ready to go into takeover, we're saying give them a pass because we're not really confident in that last grade. And the last one is we have to have rulemaking to have all this happen. Now initially we thought there was some promise to make this happen. Of late, we're hearing mixed conversation. So if they don't hold you harmless, then many of your schools are probably not looking good. The problem with that is try to explain that to your parents of why you went from an A or a B to an F. Or how did you go from a C to an F? I mean, communities are going to have their hands full trying to explain that. So that impacts the newspaper. It impacts the conversation you have with community, but it also impacts your money. So there is a lot tied to this at a time where no schools are getting rich and you are watching every penny and you're not alone in that. This is an area that we desperately need some help. So we're going to work hard to make sure that happens, but we'll see where that gets us. Going back to this, I know this isn't probably new for many of you. This is the new system, just so you are clear on it. I'm not going to assume anything. But you're under this now. For you elementary, middle schools, the state system is on the left-hand side. The federal system is on the right-hand side. The federal system you will see has more indicators in it because that's the one the department built. We put as much in it that we could because we're trying to make that look more holistically than just one test. But on the left-hand side, that's what your state lawmakers have developed. That's where we are for elementary. Fast forward into middle school, high school, it looks a little different. You have 4 indicators already. On the right-hand side, you can see you have much more. So your high schools, in my opinion, you are at a huge advantage because you have much more indicators that are within your control. For your elementaries and your middle schools, you have an uphill battle that you are trying to climb. And I'm very cognizant of that. We're trying to address it. But a high school cannot perform if students don't come at them ready. That's why we backward build into the importance of that elementary middle school experience. You are fortunate to have all those very solid at this in your district at every level. But I will tell you that things can shift quickly if we're not paying attention to some things. Graduation pathways. So this is the thing that just went into effect. There is some amazing work being done across the state in the middle schools that are helping with this. To think that kids can show up at high school and get this done is going to be a huge lift. So the big focus that I'm seeing is just the extreme change that's happening at the middle level to help people focus on this because high schools they will die a slow death if it's not being assisted heavily at the middle school. So here's the new pathways. Just so you know, some elementary folks who may not be completely aware, remember now you have to earn the credits. And in the bucket 2, you have to have another experience in there for kids. And then, we love testing in Indiana. So that bucket 3 is a list of different tests that we can have kids take. So interestingly, what's happening is your freshmen are now, this is the only way they can graduate. So let's say a freshman's like, but I got my credits, you still can't graduate anymore. So you have to have all 3. Now this is the thing that's under review again. But just so you're clear, your freshmen are under this. Your sophomores, juniors, and seniors can opt in if you choose to opt them in. So if they're not going to get across that stage traditionally, you're like, let's opt into pathways. You can do that if your school's ready to do that. So a couple things to note. We're watching pathways carefully. So on the right-hand side, just so you know what's happening with pathways, these are kids who are not graduating traditionally that have opted in. So these are the kids from last year that said, you know what, I'm not going to make it, let's see if we can go pathways. Here are the numbers. So out of that 78,000-ish that graduate every year, we are already at 16,000, almost 17,000 that are using pathways. So with I-Step 10 results, this is becoming a viable option for many of our students. That bucket 2 that we talked about, they have to do something else. Many of them are doing work-based learning. Work-based learning. So they go get a job, obviously, and they can count that as their bucket 2. Here's the issue, and you guys are going to be like coming from Yorktown, I get this. Your job availability or access for kids sometimes in this area can be difficult. Because if you go to Indianapolis, you can go anywhere around a lot of those areas, and there's access to jobs. Here, it's going to be a little tougher. Here, it's going to be harder to find internships and externships and get them jobs and get them. So many of them in your school, which you're fortunate, are going to rely on your extracurricular band. You're going to rely on your athletics. You're going to rely on church community service or just honor society community service. You're going to rely on a lot of that. But for many of our kids, they're using work-based learning to get that bucket 2 in. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Here's the thing. You determine if you're going to use football, you have to determine as a district, what does that mean? 1 year of football, 4 years of football, what does that mean? If you're going to use honor society, does that mean they get their hours once? Or is that going to count? So you get to determine that. Work-based learning is a little bit tighter than that because there's a manual that goes along with it. But that's what we're seeing now. That bucket 3 with the test, here's what's happening. ISTEP 10 is incredibly hard. It's like I learned. Our pass rate is dismal. I mean, it's not good. And it's not because our kids all of a sudden can't think, and it's not because our teachers can't teach. It's because it's very, very difficult. So our pass rate of ISTEP 10 is running at just a little bit higher than what we have on SAT, ACT, and those are college readiness exams. So what is happening is people are like, my kids can't pass that. I need to switch gears. So we have mass testing of ASFAB that's happening across the state. So ASFAB, for if you don't know, is a test for military. It's a gauge of military readiness. There is a threshold that you have to hit. So the state said if you take it and you hit it, you're college and career ready. That doesn't mean you have to go into the military. Now, we're not having huge success with that exam either because it's not as easy as you may think. But we're having more kids have success with ASFAB than we're having with ISTEP 10, by about 10 percentage points. So not huge. Here's the issue with that. Now the conversation is, yeah, you can take ASFAB, but you have to enlist. And you have to be able to do the physical part. If you do all of those, then you can count it. Here's the problem. Dr. Smith can make all the calls he wants. I can make all the calls I want. Allison can make all the calls she wants. No one's going to give you that data unless the kid goes into the Navy. Okay, so you're like, okay, check the box because you have no way to prove it. Absolutely none. So there are a lot of pieces of that we're watching, that the ASFAB has kind of become the catch-all, is quickly becoming probably not a great option. So pay attention to that. That's also quickly changing. Any questions on any of this? Scared to ask. You're also paralyzed. Oh. On this side, on the left-hand side of the screen, just so you know, our CTE Career Tech Ed, which teachers, that whole piece has been moved over to the Governor's Workforce Cabinet now. So the department has very, very little to do with Career Tech Ed. So just so you know, that's been a big change that's happened here in the last year. These are our areas of focus. This will be no surprise to many of you. Here's the deal with literacy. Kid can't read. If a kid doesn't have good writing skills, they have an uphill battle no matter what they do. We can't take our eyes off that either, but I will tell you that is not a popular focus for people that are outside of our world. We will continue to focus on literacy. We will continue to put some resources behind it. I know it's needed because we have statewide PDs that are sold out, they're free, but there's no more room, they're at capacity across the state. We also are at capacity for our Mathpalooza. Anything we're offering right now with science, math, literacy piece, there's no room left, and we are all over the place right now as a department. So the literacy piece we're working on. The other areas kind of speak for the grant. There's a lot of money on the line. This is for our schools that are like, you know what? I would love to do science at the elementary, but we don't have time. I get it in when I can get it in. Or I've tried to integrate it, and it's super hard. We have a program that's super old. The only thing I have is a textbook, and it's forever old. We don't have any equipment. I've heard everything. I've also walked into middle schools where I'm like, where's your lab? And there's no equipment, there's a bag of dirt. Like, you can't, what are you gonna do? Teachers are gonna buy that equipment? Or are they gonna buy those supplies? So this is a grant that helps with that. It is, again, a competitive, but we just gave our third round out to help with elementary, middle school, and high school. It's all the STEM area focus, which is that science, technology, engineering, and math. Many schools are doing some amazing work in reintroducing some of that science the way they can into their elementaries and middle schools where before they were really struggling. I will say there's a huge disparity. I go into some schools and I will tell you their high school science program could make Purdue look bad. And I walk into some and I'm like, whew, we got some work to do. And it's financial. It's a money issue. So no one's at fault. It's not like the teacher doesn't want it. It's not like the superintendent doesn't want to buy it. There are finances tied to that. So this STEM acceleration grant has been huge as far as helping schools. Third round going out here soon. Career coaching grant. This is the grant that high schools and middle schools were told, this is how we're getting you help with counseling. Who are my counselors? So you're varied, and so now they want you to be career coaches, and I know you know that, but we said that's not realistic. And they're like, great, we'll give you a grant, here's the money. So we were in charge of the money that went through the governor's workforce cabinet, but there was a lot of money on the line. So with our first $1 million that went out, the biggest chunk of it, now we had a lot of applicants, but the biggest chunk of it only went to 3 districts. So we had about $1 million that were supposed to solve the world's problems, or at least help us start thinking about the problems. It went to 3 districts. It went to Gary, went to IPS, and one went to Ivy Tech with a partnership with a couple of districts. And I was the only no vote on that, which is not a big surprise to some of you who are following what we're doing. I was the only no vote on that with the governor's workforce cabinet because that was the seed money for many districts. So I know we're not going to be able to serve 300 districts with $1 million. I get it. But we can do more than 3. So we have 3 districts that took $1 million, and now there's 0 left in the coffers. So, but that's the money that's been set aside for that career coaching piece. Here's what I would encourage you to do. Keep, as grad pathways keep moving along, keep your notes, do your homework, because at some point, someone's going to call your central office and say, how much did that cost you? And if you say, we're not sure, that's not helpful. Keep good notes. What does that grad pathway mean? And I would backward build that into your middle school. Have that information. We're already starting to make calls for certain districts that have more machines at central office that track more of that. But at some point, your small, your rural schools are going to start getting some questions. So make sure you are being diligent in collecting that information. Digital learning grants, we are revamping those, but those are the ones that are given throughout the state. If you are interested in the digital learning piece, keep an eye on some things through our SAMs and PAMs. If you're not on SAMs and PAMs, that's our weekly update. Anybody can sign up. There are no secrets. I have a lot of legislators. I have press. Everybody watches it. You get it every Friday morning. You go on, you give me your email, you're done. It's on the web, on our DOE website. This information is coming out. So the e-learning piece is getting revamped, but some good money that should be coming. Computer science and cyber. This is another area that we are leading the charge in Indiana. We have a great deal of high schools that are now offering computer science and or cyber. There's a lot of money coming, a lot of money coming. I know when I walk out the door, there will be more money coming in this area. So even that's K-12, that whole K-12 piece, cyber, computer science, that's just where the focus is going. So if you're not quite there, if you've not been to any training, if you don't have, I would say in your district, your size, at least 2 elementary people trained in computer science, at the middle level, at least 2, and at the high school, at least 2 with the district your size. If you're not there, you need to make a commitment to get there. It's not going away. So what's happening is we have trained the trainers, we have trained the districts, we offer a lot of professional development in that area. If you're not revamping curriculum in this area, we have help for that. So if you are like stuck and paralyzed, you want to do something, and you're like, lay down time. I'm trying to grade papers, run my class, I am spent. We've got resources for that. We can help you. So if you're interested, please let us know and we can get that to you. So this is a big area. Again, a lot of money flowing, and at a time where all money counts for districts, this is just kind of an easy get per se, because there's just a lot of easy areas on that. Something to pay attention to, and this did not come from me. This came from Dr. Hicks, who's out at Ball State, the Center of Economic Development. We work closely with Mike Hicks, and we work closely with Larry DeBoer at Purdue, an economist. Very, very different people, very, very different messages, and very, very different lenses. But one thing that is consistent is this. So they're telling us the push in Indiana is to move away from a high-level higher education degree. So you're probably seeing that. Before, the conversation was, let's get kids to get a degree, let's get kids to get a degree. Now that push is slowly starting to move away from that. Now, I was a special ed teacher, middle school teacher, elementary principal, superintendent. I get not every kid's ready to go to college. I understand that that's just not going to work for some kids. Here's what I also know. If we take the emphasis off of it, that's where that percentage is going to go down quickly, because it's an easy take the emphasis off of it. So the shift is going away. We're also moving to job readiness versus career readiness. Now, as a parent, if someone came up to my child and said, I'm going to get you through high school and get you prepared for that next job or that next position you're going to take, I'd be like, Many of you as parents would not go for that either. You know it's not about 4 years after high school, it's about 40 years after high school. You want them to have a well-rounded education, you want them to be involved, you want them to be good people. You know it's much bigger than I'm going to get you ready for job X. Here's what's happening, and we're watching it. Elkhart, pathway, right into the RV industry. You leave high school, go. What's happening right now in Elkhart? They're getting laid off. But that's what we train them to do. We train them to go into pathway, but that's the only thing they're going to do. So now we have developed a system that is job ready versus career ready. That is a different lens. So whether you agree with it or not, that is up to you to decide. Ask yourself, because we have a lot of people saying, yeah, I agree with that, college is not important. And I'm like, what do your kids go? IU? Really? So that's the conversation that's happening from a lot of people across our state. So pay attention to this, just the emphasis is shifting, whether it's good or bad. Again, I know there are kids that they'll go out and they'll weld, they'll go be family farmers, they will go into the family restaurant business and do well. But we need to make sure that that is a viable option and not just hoping for the best to send them into an area that's not going to be sustainable. Evolving workforce needs, I'm not going to read all these to you, I'm going to bring something to your attention. On the 2020 on the left-hand side, it is heavy with social emotional. We hear from employers all the time. We hire people, they can't get along with anybody. They're lazy, they can't get to work, they can't get along, they can't problem solve, they can't think. I hear it all the time when I'm with workforce. I'm sure you hear it all the time. Sometimes you're like, wait, did you just describe my period 3 class? So I hear it all the time, and so do you. But the heavy emphasis on the needs on 2020 is that whole collaborative piece. I would argue it's the same in schools. You do not want to be the person who works next to a classroom where that person is constantly complaining. Your jobs are exhausting. You got no time for that. You do not have time to sit in a teacher's lounge where people just won't let up. Like, talk about something positive for a bit. So I would argue ours in education in 2020 is heavy SEL as well. But those are the skills. They're moving toward people who can work together, who have some emotional stability, who can get along, who aren't a hot mess all the time, who don't bring their family hot mess into work all the time. You know the drill. We're also talking about how do you coordinate with others. You may have great lesson plans. Are you sharing them? You may have a great lab. Are you working with someone on that? Are you teaming across your content? Those changes have to be happening. If they're not happening, we can help. That's a choice. That's not a resource, that's a choice. So a lot of those skills are changing. This is another one that makes that point as well. 2 different highly respected workforce areas that are saying this is what we need. We're seeing the same thing. So again, if you look at some of what's going down, that physical manual part is going down those needs, but the things that are going up, social, emotional, those people who are thinkers, those high cognitive skills, this goes exactly to the last screen that I showed you. It's not a surprise to all of you, but the workforce is saying it, educators are saying it, we're all signaling it. So what are we doing about it? Well, I will tell you, I walk into some districts and I could have walked in there 20 years ago and it looks exactly the same. I've worked in small districts and mid-sized districts, and I will tell you, it's a choice when you shift. When I worked at Westdale was when I first got out of school and got a teaching job. Long way to get there, but finally got to Westdale. It was at a time where there were no jobs. Imagine that as teachers, when you got out, you had to like compete for a job, which was awesome. But when we got out, I worked at Westdale, and here's what I learned. I loved working in a small system because you knew mom, dad, aunt, uncle, brother, sister. There weren't too many prom date selections because everybody's related. I mean, you know the drill. That was a small school, and it was great. I loved it. It was a family. When people say it's like a family, it truly was like a family. We knew everybody. We took care of people when they were sick. We took care of people when they were well. It was the best first teaching job I could have had because I learned so much beyond that classroom. It was great. But I also then moved to another school. And what I did in retrospect was learn how much you start thinking alike, you start planning alike. There were some of us that started dressing alike, and you know what I mean, because you're like, where'd you get that? So you start, you become in your little bubble. Then I went into another mid-sized school and the same thing happened, but you almost don't realize it until you have a different lens. So then I went to the state level and I'm like, man, if I could go back, I'd be a much better teacher, administrator, educator, because my eyes have been opened to much more than it originally was. What can you do about that? One, continue to read, get out, get professional development, get connected. You cannot leave your living room and get connected. You have to make a choice about that. You are not going to go to a doctor who said, I have not had any professional development in 20 years, and I've never left this town in 20 years, so this is all I know. You would be like, I probably need to go and get an opinion somewhere else if it's something serious. We're no different. So I encourage you, I also just put that in your mind to think, be careful, because it's very easy to get comfortable. And at a time where there's a lot of different things happening, you owe it to your kids not to be comfortable. So just be cognizant of that. With that, the shift in instruction. I know there are secondary people who like to lecture. I don't know if that's the case here, but I go across Indiana like, we love it. We love to lecture. I know you do. I know, you're good at it, and kids can learn. That can't be the only thing we do. When we just went back to say you have to work together, be cooperative with each other, know how to solve problems, if you are just sitting like you're doing today and getting information, and that's all you do every day, every class period you got, we're in trouble. Your kids have got to be practicing, they got to be in group work, they've got to be doing a lot of different activities, and many of you are good at that, but that is hard. Because you got to keep a pace in that classroom, you've got to have a lot of tools in your toolkit. It is a choice. So I would just encourage you to think differently as far as the instructional piece. What does that look like? Those dots say a lot. Old school dots were about collecting dots. Give me the information, feed it to me, and be done. And I will be honest with you, that's me. I go into a class now, and I'm like, just tell me what I need to know, just give me the information, don't make me work with people, let me get out of here. That's me, because that's how I went through school, and I got real good and comfortable with that. I just collected the dots. And then I figured out what I need to do with it later. That is not going to work. So that piece of not collecting dots anymore, but to the right-hand side where it's connecting those dots. And that is hard. That takes a different instructional approach, it takes different time, it takes different resource partnering. It's just hard. So there are times where your administrators come to you and say, guess what we're going to try? And sometimes you're like, you've got to be kidding me. We're trying another thing. And it's just a revolving door. Part of that's our world as professionals, but part of that is by choice to get better. So if you need help with that piece, you need to start communicating that. There's no shame in that. If you're like, you know what, I've lectured a lot and I'm not sure what else to do. There's no shame in asking. There's no shame in asking your peers, your administrators, or going out to find out. So that instructional shift is huge. And we're going to give the slide deck to Dr. Smith, and he can send that out to all of you if you want to see this, because I know there's a lot on there. Please keep your eye on this. As parents, how many of you have kids in high school? How many of you have kids in college? Elementary? Okay, so you got a little bit of time. Interesting. When this was presented, you're like, are you kidding? I'm like, it really does hit you in the gut. On the left-hand side is Indiana. This is not moving. These are the jobs that are being developed in Indiana. So the top two jobs, LTHS. Anybody? less than a high school diploma. Those are the jobs we're creating, less than a high school diploma. Then you go to the second one, those who have a high school diploma. On the left-hand side with the associate degrees and up, those are where we are struggling. This is just Indiana. But you refocus to the right-hand side, which shows you a lens of the nation job growth and what is happening with the nation. So you can see by far the one that's struggling is less than a high school. But the one that has the highest number is the higher education. So you can see a bachelor's degree. The reason I show you this is twofold. One, I go into a lot of universities and I ask the kids, where are you interning? And they're like, California, Chicago. They start naming, they're out, many of them are out of state. Some are in Indiana, but many of them are out of state. You know what? They don't come back. They're like, oh, I got a job offer from Toyota and I took it at 60 grand. I'm like, good for you. The reason that's happening is because many of the internships beyond K-12 are happening outside of our state. Some are in state, but the mass majority are happening out of state that require higher degrees. All of you are degree people. So for you to sit and say, it's not important, you didn't believe that, or you wouldn't be sitting here. So those degrees and those credentials matter. So here's what happens. The economists will tell us what's happening here is going to swing here. So there are about 3 states they watch it, and Indiana is one of them. And so the switch, we're going to see less emphasis on less than a high school diploma once the maybe recession hits, or within the next 18 months is what they're telling us. And we're going to see less on just a high school diploma, and it's going to start mirroring the right-hand side. Why do I tell you that? You are the pipeline. You are the pipeline to getting those students prepared. So to hover in that world of we're okay, they can make $7 an hour and raise a family. I think we have to be cognizant of this is what's happening and we're getting ready to make that shift. So just data to pay attention to. Our current governance structure, and then I promise to take questions. Just so you know what's happening, I've had a lot of people ask questions on how does education work? It is your world. It is your profession. If you don't know how it works in Indiana, what makes you think a parent cares? So I'm going to give you the snapshot, really fast version of how it works. And some of you may already know this. This is current. The blue is the independent. So that's me independently elected. Obviously, that's going to go away. But the rest of the yellow is really the executive office, the governor's office. And so it's interesting when you look at the yellow pieces that are controlled by the governor's office, and then you also look at the red dots, those are appointees from the governor's office. That is heavy one person. And I don't care who's in the office, what party, don't care. When you are across the nation, that is an enormous amount of power for one office. I mean, that's not normal. You can go look at any other state, they're like, what are you doing? I mean, it's just a lot of, from pre-K all the way to higher education into the workforce, power of one. This is the current structure. So we do have one independent agency. What's happening in 2021, or post when my term's over, this is going to be the structure. So in other states, what has happened is the State Board of Education or the Department of Education, or my position as state superintendent, they call it usually commissioner or secretary of education. There is a system that voters have a vote through either an appointment, a confirmation, or actually you go to the voter's box to vote for State Board of Ed people. So there's a system in place. So no matter Republican, Democrat, Independent, when I'm out and about, usually it's the elderly folks who will say, where's my voice in this? Because they know it well. They've been voting forever, they're very savvy on a lot of the political pieces of it. And I'm like, well, this is the way it is. I mean, that's above my authority and above my pay grade to answer that question, but this is what it's going to be. But just so you are cognizant of how it works, this is it. And the State Board of Education in Indiana is really an appointed board. So in most states, all but 3, it's elected. But we're going to be one that on top of the state board, on top of the Department of Education, it's going to be under one umbrella, under one control. And again, I don't care who that person, who he or she is. I don't care political affiliation. It's not about that. It's about that much power to any one person in any state is unique. And I'm only telling you that because it's your world. It's your profession. You don't see this for nursing. You don't see this for those who go work for the Department of Transportation. You don't see this for engineers. This is it. This is us. So it's good to be aware of that information, again, regardless of positive, negatives, and how you feel about it. Couple of things on this, just to reiterate that need for rigor. I think we've hit that hard enough as far as that shift in instruction. Make sure you're keeping your X's and O's, be cognizant, be a learner, know what's happening, be well informed. I mean, that's what we are hoping you're doing. As a parent, I was hoping my teachers or my son was keeping up on their X's and O's and opening their minds so that they could better educate our child. So just a couple things. The access to rigor is huge. People have asked me, what would I do if I went back? Here's what I would do. And I know this is not going to be a popular answer, but this is literally, don't know, a letter from their number and make it a 1. I would shift everything down. The schools who have done it, you watch. You watch what they can do. And it's not about schools that have kids who are school ready. I've seen some high poverty schools that are shifting. Because if you're going to play the game of college and career ready, you really don't have a choice in the current system that's here and what's going to come. This isn't going to go away. The iLearn demands aren't going to go away. They may have a different test, but the demands aren't going to go away. It'll just be a different test. So if you're shifting things, it's a conversation to have of where can you do that? And I know it's easier said than done, but I tell you, if I go back into district, that's day one. We're making some huge adjustments. The other piece I would do, my middle school would look totally revamped. Because if your high schools have a prayer on some of the stuff that is going to be required to do, and a lot of that starting in Florida, look at Nevada, it's coming. For us to say it's not coming, it's coming. I'm telling you it's coming. Your middle schools are going to have to adjust. So those are the two big things as far as looking at those standards, adjusting the actual grade level, and then that middle school would look, it has to look different. So those are the two big things. Any questions? You brave soul, you're like, oh. Okay?
We can't solve all the problems at one time. We're going to take one at a time. What do you suggest that we hit our legislators with really strongly as a group of teachers?
That is a great question. She said, what do we hit our legislators with? Here's the thing. You don't hit yours. This is going to sound disrespectful. You have lovely people that represent you. Those are not the people you need to get to because they have zero power. So they have a vote. You need to get to the ed committees. You need to get to those people who are on the Senate Ed Committee and the House Ed Committees. And we have those names. Well, we've been telling people, don't do canned emails. Don't do crazy dissertations to them. You stick to 3 bulleted points and you say, here's where we need your help. Quit changing the test. Hold us accountable for something that's realistic, which is the hold harmless piece, and fund us adequately. Those are the 3 bullet points that we're like, okay, if you keep it simple, if you send too much, they're going to delete you. If you send them too much, if you start getting in the weeds, like I've had people say, I reached out and told them about, it was a chemistry teacher, and he got really weedy into the needs of science. I'm like, you lost them in sentence 1. So you got to keep it, remember they have other jobs that are outside of education, they're busy people, but you got to keep it simple, but you got to reach out to your ed committees and your ed committees in both chambers. Those are the folks who are calling the shots of your world. Your people who represent you, depending on where you live, and some that are in your district, they have a vote, but those aren't the ones you're concerned with. It's a great question. This was not a plant. You better be careful.
Locally created grant pathway options. Were there any examples?
So the locally created pathways came out as an option. Some of you remember that if you're paying attention. Many have been submitted. Many have been rejected. So only 3 got through. So in 2 years, we've only approved 3. Once they're approved, anybody can use them. So if you want to prepare a child for the RV industry here, you can use the one that was put in through Elkhart, or Wani, I think, put it through. You can use it. There was another one in Greater Clark that was a fine arts pathway that if the student was in marching band, show choir, regular choir, it had layers. Now, I will say, coming from small, mid-sized district, like we didn't have all those. So it would be hard for us to utilize that, but that one, the fine arts was approved, and the third one was in fabrication of some metal work. So you'd have to have some really unique resources. Those are the three that have been approved. You could try, you could put a pathway through and try to get it through. That's something that fits here in Covington. It's just, they're hard right now to get through. There's just not very many of them that are getting through, but you could try. My fear with some of that is, I know anytime you do that, it's hours, hundreds of hours on that, and we're just, no. Can we get? Yeah.
You compared the three tests, the SAT, the ACT, and the ILM. And you said that the ILM score is a tougher test?
So ISTEP 10, we're only a little bit off from our ACT, SAT scores for the percentage, but you gotta remember, only a finite group take that. So not everybody's taking it. So that kind of skews that as well. But our iLearn scores, those percentages are running true to how our students are actually performing high school-wise on those that actually hit that college readiness threshold of ACT, SAT. Depends on what school you are in, and I don't know yours well enough to know are you heavy SAT here, or both? SAT. So there are some schools that do much better on SAT than ACT. There are some that do vice versa. I mean, you go to inner city, they're gonna heavy ACT. Their kids do much better on ACT. So it depends on your district, and some kids, you guys probably feel this more than some districts. Some kids take both to see or they take it multiple times, so your counselors would know that better. So it depends, because you have a different clientele, different demographic here, that some of your kids are able to do that, which is a good thing too. The state's paying once. So if it's SAT or ACT, depending on what the contract is, the state will pay one time. So if the child doesn't pass it, that becomes an access issue. So what if it takes me 5 times to graduate from the state of Indiana? Guess who pays for that? Not the state. I mean, you got the parents. If the parent doesn't have the money, then you on bucket 3 are looking for other options. That's why we were saying the access piece is questionable. Because if you're sitting, the other piece of that is, if you're sitting in a large, like Warren Township, you have access to all those bucket items. If you're in Covington, Westdale, Yorktown, you don't. Because you can't. You can't offer everything. So your kids may have 4 ways to graduate, and a kid from Warren may have 12 ways to graduate, because of access. And that's just the reality, which we have huge concerns, especially for our special ed population and our English learner population. It's going to be a stretch. It's going to be tough. So, but there are just inequities. But yeah, those percentages are running pretty true to those college and career readiness tests. Good question. Anything else? Are you on the state? So appreciate your work. Do not hesitate. If you have questions on anything, the slide deck we will get. Thank you very much. Have a good day.